What if the reason you keep seeing does and small bucks instead of mature deer is one habit you picked up years ago and never questioned? I've spent close to 3 decades chasing whitetails through the river bottoms and ridge country of southern Iowa, and I'm going to hand you 14 tricks pulled straight from those seasons, the failures included. Stick with me, because number 11 is a wind trick most hunters never even consider, and it's the reason I killed a 152-inch 10-point on a Tuesday afternoon when the forecast said the wind was wrong. This isn't theory from a magazine rack. This is boots in the mud, stand time logged, and mistakes paid for in tags that never got filled. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why mature bucks vanish after opening weekend and what you can do differently starting this season. Most guys learn to hunt the wind direction and stop there, but mature bucks are reading thermals long before the general wind ever kicks in. Cold air sinks and warm air rises, and on calm mornings in hill country, this creates a drainage effect where scent pools downhill even if your compass says the breeze is blowing north. Researchers at the University of Georgia's Deer Lab have documented that whitetails carry roughly 297 million olfactory receptors, which is about 50 times more than a human, and they use that nose to read layered scent long before they see danger. I learned this the hard way on a bluff above the Chariton River bottom, where I set up perfectly for a west wind, and still got busted because the morning thermal was pulling my scent straight down into a bedding thicket 80 yards below me. Now, I glass the terrain first and ask where cold air will drain by 7 a.m., not just where the wind will blow. A good rule is to hunt high ground in the morning while thermals rise, and low ground in the evening once they start sinking again, generally starting 30 to 45 minutes before sunset. The common mistake is trusting a wind app alone. Apps model general atmospheric flow, not the microclimate inside a wooded draw. Carry a cheap milkweed puffer bottle and test it at your exact stand height, not at the truck. That $5 tool has saved more hunts for me than any piece of expensive gear I own. By September, the sign you're reading is already old news, because bucks have shifted patterns since spring, and most summer scouting just confirms where deer were, not where they'll be during the season. Late winter and early spring scouting, right after snow melts in states like Iowa, Illinois, and Ohio, lets you find shed antlers, rub lines, and bedding areas without any leaves hiding the terrain and without pressuring deer that are still on the landscape. A study out of Mississippi State's Deer Ecology and Management Lab tracked collared bucks and found many mature deer use the same core bedding areas across multiple years, sometimes shifting less than 200 yards, about 2 football fields, from one season to the next. That means March scouting data holds real value 7 months later. I walk creek bottoms near Bloomfield every March, looking for south-facing slopes where snow melted first, because those are the thermal bedding zones bucks favor in the cold months and often return to. The common mistake is scouting in August when bucks are still in loose bachelor groups and using totally different summer range tied to soybean fields. Instead, mark rub lines, funnel points, and shed locations on a map in spring, then confirm with cameras in late summer without walking the core area again. Minimum intrusion now means maximum deer activity in October. Most hunters hang their cameras right on the trail they think a buck uses, and that's exactly why mature deer stop showing up on camera after the first 2 weeks. Older bucks, 4.5 years or better, tend to scent check trails from downwind before committing, according to research from Dr. Bronson Strickland's team at Mississippi State, who found mature bucks investigate travel corridors from 20 to 40 yards off the actual trail more often than younger deer. If your camera sits right on the path, you're only photographing the deer that haven't lived long enough to be cautious. Instead, back your cameras off to field edges, funnel pinch points, and creek crossings roughly 400 yards, about 4 city blocks from the core bedding area. This gives you information without saturating the property with human odor near where deer sleep. I run mine on the crop edges around Centerville, checking them every 10 to 14 days, always at midday when thermals are neutral and deer are typically bedded down. The common mistake is checking cameras too often, every 2 or 3 days, which stacks enough ground scent to push mature bucks into nocturnal patterns. Cellular cameras solve this by letting you check at activity without ever walking in. If you can't afford cellular units, treat every camera check like a hunt itself. Full scent control, correct wind, minimal noise. Everybody floods the woods during the peak rut in early November, but the pressure that week often pushes mature bucks into nocturnal or thick cover patterns, and you're competing with every other hunter in the county. The lesser-known opportunity is the second rut, roughly 28 days after peak breeding, when unbred does cycle again. Research from the Quality Deer Management Association, now the National Deer Association, shows this secondary rut typically occurs in early December across much of the whitetail's range and produces a short but intense window of daylight buck movement. Because hunting pressure has dropped off dramatically by then, since most tags are already filled or hunters have given up, mature bucks that survive November are often less cautious and more willing to move in daylight chasing that smaller number of receptive does. I killed my best buck on December 3rd 2 years ago, an 8-year-old deer according to the jawbone aging, moving at 11 a.m. Through a pinch point nobody had touched since October. The common mistake is packing it in after Thanksgiving because you assume the rut is over. Instead, watch your camera data for renewed daytime doe activity in late November. That's your signal the second rut is loading, and get back in the stand during that narrow window before the cold and holidays clear the woods for good. Quick pause. Everything we just walked through, the patterns, the timing, the mistakes most hunters never catch, it's all pulled straight from the Buck Hunter's Bible, 2026 edition. This thing's packed into 336 pages, with 101 field-tested tricks real hunters use season after season. Right now, you can also grab a free second book, the 30-day opening day roadmap, a day-by-day plan that gets you fully ready before opening morning. Copies won't sit at this offer forever, so if you're serious about this season, now's the time. Link in the description, QR code on screen. Stop guessing the woods. Start reading them. Most cover scent products just mask odor temporarily, but understanding the actual chemistry of what deer detect changes how you approach scent control entirely. Human sweat and skin bacteria produce compounds like isovaleric acid and butyric acid, the same molecules found in aged cheese and rancid butter, and deer are exceptionally tuned to detect them at concentrations of parts per trillion, according to research compiled by Dr. Carl Miller at UGA's Deer Lab. Spraying scent killer over clothes helps, but it doesn't address boots, backpacks, or truck interiors where these compounds build up over a season. I switched to storing all my hunting clothes in a sealed tote with dried leaves and cedar shavings from the actual property I hunt. So, the clothing absorbs terrain-specific compounds like alpha-pinene from cedar and native plant terpenes instead of smelling like a laundry room. The common mistake is spraying scent eliminator right before climbing into the stand, while your boots still carry gas station and truck cab odor from the drive-in. Instead, change into your final layer and boots at the truck, away from the door, and walk in on a route that lets thermals carry your scent away from likely bedding, not toward it. No spray replaces route planning, but the right combination stacks your odds meaningfully higher. Not all rubs are created equal, and the height and aggression of a rub tells you plenty about the deer that made it before you ever see him on camera. A rub 3 to 4 feet high with light bark scraping is usually a younger buck, 2.5 years or so, testing his antlers. A rub that reaches higher, sometimes 5 feet or more, about the height of a refrigerator door, with deep gouges and shredded bark, typically comes from a mature buck standing on his hind legs to reach overhanging limbs, a behavior documented by researchers at Auburn University's DEER program, studying dominance signaling through visual and olfactory marking. These bucks aren't just relieving velvet itch. They're depositing scent from forehead glands loaded with pheromone compounds to establish territory ahead of the rut. I found a rub 2 seasons ago on a hedge post near a bean field outside Bloomfield that had bark shredded nearly 5.5 feet up. And 3 weeks later, a trail camera confirmed a heavy-bodied 10-point working that same line at last light. The common mistake is treating all rubs as equal sign of buck activity without noting height, freshness, or the direction the tree faces relative to travel. Instead, log rub height and orientation on your scouting map. A cluster of tall, aggressive rubs facing a consistent direction often marks a mature buck's core travel corridor, days before the rut fully unfolds. During the rut, hunting doe bedding areas directly is a mistake, because you'll bump does and blow the whole setup before a buck ever shows. Instead, mature bucks cruise the downwind edge of doe bedding, scent checking for receptive does without ever entering the thicket itself. a pattern confirmed through GPS collar studies from Penn State's Deer Research Program, tracking buck movement relative to doe core areas during the 2-week rut peak. That downwind edge, often just 50 to 75 yards off the thicket, about the length of 3 school buses, is where you want your stand, not inside the bedding itself. I hunt a fence line outside Centerville that borders a cedar thicket, and every November without fail, the camera data shows bucks working that exact edge between 9 a.m. and noon, cruising with their nose low. The common mistake hunters make is climbing right into the thick bedding cover, thinking they'll ambush a buck chasing a doe, but that approach almost always results in bumping deer you never even see, and word travels fast in tight cover. Instead, identify the bedding thicket first, then check wind direction and terrain funnels along its perimeter. Set your stand where thermals and prevailing wind carry your scent away from the thicket while still covering the travel edge, and be ready to sit longer than usual, since cruising bucks move on their own schedule, not yours. Calling blind on a schedule rarely works, but calling in response to what a buck is doing changes everything. If a buck is walking away or ignoring you, a loud grunt sequence often makes him suspicious rather than curious. Research on cervid vocal communication from the University of Georgia's Deer Research Facility found that mature bucks respond most consistently to soft, single grunts when they're already displaying interest behavior, like scent checking or a stiff-legged walk, versus aggressive tending grunts, which only work during actual chase sequences. I watched a buck 2 seasons ago pause at 150 yards, about a football field and a half, testing the air. One soft grunt turned his head my direction, and a second, quieter one 30 seconds later pulled him to 20 yards. Had I hit him with a loud aggressive sequence right away, my experience says he likely would have hung up or circled downwind to scent check the sound first. The common mistake is calling too much and too loud, treating a grunt tube like a dinner bell. Instead, watch body posture before you call. Ears up and alert but not alarmed means try a soft grunt. Head down, feeding or walking away confidently usually means stay silent and let him go, since overcalling an uninterested buck teaches him to associate that sound with danger for the rest of the season on that property. Big food plots planted in open fields get hunted by every deer in the county after dark, but a small half-acre kill plot tucked inside timber, invisible from roads and neighboring land, changes daylight movement completely. The concept, popularized by land management consultants like the team at Whitetail Properties, relies on planting shade-tolerant forage like brassicas or clover in small forest openings, so deer feel secure entering during shooting light instead of waiting for full dark like they do in exposed fields. Mature bucks in particular avoid large open plots during daylight because the sightline distance, sometimes 200 yards or more across an open field, feels exposed compared to a tight timber pocket where they can be in and out of cover within seconds. I converted a scrubby half-acre opening in hardwoods near my lease into a small brassica plot 3 years ago, and camera data showed a shift from 90% nighttime activity on the neighboring big field to daylight visits starting within the first 6 weeks. The common mistake is spending your entire budget and effort on one large plot near the road because it's easy to plant and easy to check. Instead, find small natural openings deep in cover, even ones as tight as a 1/4 acre, and put your effort there. Less visibility for you means more comfort for the buck you're after. Everyone talks about cold fronts, but the specific trigger for daylight movement is usually the pressure drop that precedes the front, not the temperature itself. Data compiled from over 500,000 hours of trail camera activity by the tracking app HuntStand and analyzed alongside National Weather Service pressure readings shows deer movement increases measurably when barometric pressure falls below 29.90 inches of mercury and continues dropping over a 12 to 24-hour window. This matches deer's sensitivity to changes in ear canal and sinus pressure, a mechanism biologists believe ties to changes in inner ear fluid dynamics affecting comfort and alertness. I've killed 3 of my last 5 mature bucks within a 2-hour window of a pressure drop registering on my weather app, regardless of whether the temperature swing was dramatic or mild. One of those hunts sat at a comfortable 58 degrees, nothing that looked like classic cold front weather, but the pressure had dropped nearly 0.4 of an inch since the previous afternoon. The common mistake is waiting only for a big temperature crash before committing a valuable site. Instead, check pressure trends the night before, and if you see a steady fall predicted, especially arriving within a few hours of dawn or dusk, treat that sit as a priority day regardless of what the thermometer says. Pressure moves deer more consistently than cold alone. Look, I'll be straight with you. Everything in this video is just a taste of what's inside the Buck Hunter's Bible, 26th edition, 336 pages loaded with 101 field-tested tricks that hold up in real conditions. And to get you set up before season even starts, we're throwing in a free second book, the 30-day opening day roadmap, a day-by-day plan that gets you ready before opening morning. This offer's tied to right now, not some fake countdown, just the reality that it won't stick around forever. Link in the description, QR code on screen. Hunt smarter, not harder. This is the wind trick from the hook, and it took me years to trust it. Instead of always hunting a straight headwind or tailwind setup, the inside corner where two habitat edges meet, say, a fence line meeting a timber point, lets you hunt a crosswind that blows across the funnel rather than straight down it. This matters because deer traveling that funnel typically walk with the wind quartering into their face from one side, meaning your scent stream, blowing perpendicular to their travel, drifts away from their path, even though it's not a classic headwind setup. Wildlife biologist Dr. Grant Woods has discussed this exact positioning in field research on funnel hunting, noting that inside corners create natural pinch points where deer travel predictably, regardless of wind direction, because the terrain itself, not just the wind, dictates the route. On that Tuesday hunt I mentioned, the wind was technically wrong by traditional standards, blowing across my position rather than into my face. But the fence line and timber point forced that 10-point to walk a corridor 15 yards downwind of true scent contact. The common mistake is abandoning a great terrain funnel because the wind direction doesn't match a textbook setup. Instead, study how the terrain itself bends deer travel, then find the crosswind position where your scent crosses their path rather than traveling straight down it. Terrain often beats wind chart perfection. Saying deer are in the acorns isn't specific enough, because white oak acorns and red oak acorns behave completely differently and deer prioritize them on a schedule. White oak acorns, lower in tannin content, are sweeter and deer will strip them almost immediately when they drop, typically in late September, while red oak acorns, higher in bitter tannins, often get ignored until the sweeter food sources run out, sometimes not becoming a primary food source until November or December. This distinction has been documented by forestry and wildlife researchers at Auburn University studying whitetail food preference across mast species. I've watched deer walk directly past a red oak, dropping heavily to feed under a white oak 50 yards away, that had far fewer acorns on the ground, because the taste and tannin load made the difference. The common mistake is scouting for oak trees broadly and hunting the first mast you find without identifying species. Instead, learn to identify white oak by its rounded lobed leaves and lighter bark versus red oak's pointed bristle-tipped leaves, and prioritize white oaks early in the season. Once white oak acorns are exhausted, usually by mid to late October in most of the Midwest, shift your attention to red oak flats, because that's when deer traffic will pivot to the less preferred but now necessary food source. Decoys work, but only in a narrow window, and using one outside that window can do more harm than good. During the 2 weeks leading into peak rut, when bucks are actively establishing dominance and testing for receptive does, a buck decoy positioned in open sight lines, roughly 30 to 40 yards from your stand, about the distance from home plate to the pitcher's mound, and a bit further, can trigger a dominance response in mature bucks looking to challenge a rival. Outside that window, during early season or deep post-rut lull, decoys often just spook deer, who have no reason to investigate an unfamiliar silhouette, and every reason to be cautious of anything unusual near a field edge. Research on deer visual perception from Purdue University's wildlife program notes whitetails have strong movement detection, but comparatively weaker fine detail resolution, meaning decoys work more through silhouette and posture cues than realistic detail, so a doe decoy paired subtly with a buck decoy often outperforms a buck decoy alone, by suggesting a breeding opportunity rather than just a rival. I've had bucks circle downwind of a decoy setup for 10 minutes before committing, so scent control on the decoy itself matters as much as on your clothing. The common mistake is leaving a decoy out too long into the season or using one in thick timber where deer can't see it from a distance. Open sight lines and the right 2-week window make all the difference. Full moon versus new moon debates miss the more useful detail, which is moon overhead and underfoot timing, meaning when the moon is directly above or directly opposite the Earth from your location. Research compiled by biologist John Alsop and later expanded through data from the Journal of Wildlife Management on deer activity cycles suggests deer movement correlates more tightly with these overhead and underfoot windows than with phase alone, since gravitational and light cues appear to influence feeding and travel timing regardless of whether the moon is full or new. Practically, this means a Solunar table, cross-referenced with sunrise and sunset, can predict a 90-minute window of increased deer activity that shifts by roughly an hour each day. I cross-referenced this data against 6 years of my own hunting log, and the overlap between recorded buck sightings and predicted major overhead or underfoot periods sits above 70%, a pattern too consistent to call coincidence. The common mistake is picking hunting days based only on the monthly phase, hunting every full moon weekend regardless of what time the moon crosses overhead that day. Instead, pull a Solunar table for your specific coordinates, not a generic one, and plan your sights around the daily major and minor periods layered on top of dawn and dusk. When a major period lines up with legal shooting light, treat that sit like a holiday. Those are the days mature bucks make mistakes. Here's what I want you to sit with after this video ends. Every one of these 14 tricks works because it replaces a guess with a reason, wind with thermal science, food plots with sightline psychology, moon phase with overhead timing. Mature bucks aren't lucky survivors. They're deer that punished every hunter who relied on habit instead of understanding. The season you stop hunting the way you were taught and start hunting the way the deer behaves is the season everything changes. That's not a tip. That's the whole game.